Today's tutor, Phoebe Hicks, took part in Portrait Artist of the Year back in 2017 when she produced a portrait of presenter Sue Perkins that was full of vitality.
What's great about this is many people have said over the years you're no oil painting, and now I can say, well, I beg to differ.
Her contemporary twist on a classic style ensured that she stood out.
That's mind-blowing that they chose me. I can't believe it.
At the semi-final, her portrayal of actor Imelda Staunton was full of narrative and captivated her sitter.
I'm going to go with this painting.
As well as creating beautiful portraits of adults, Phoebe is regularly commissioned to paint children. So it's back to school with Ms. Hicks for today's masterclass, Child Portraiture.
Today, I'm going to show you how I approach a child's portrait. I'm going to be working in charcoal, which is perfect for children, as they have such soft, rounded features. I'm going to be working on a portrait of my son, Billy, who is rising to and a perfect example of all of those little nuances that you have to capture in a swiftly changing face. I'm working on a soft pastel card, and I've got a few marks here which have helped me just decide a few proportions. So I'm going to start by blocking in these marks. I'm initially going to focus on the whole size of the head. As this portrait is face on, I want to make sure I capture the silhouette well, but at the same time, I have very distinct lines, particularly around his cheeks, that I want to get right. So we'll go under the chin. I'm looking at the dark parts in the face, like in the middle of the mouth, the nostrils, and the eye. As the relationship between these three are potentially the most important, because if these three relate to each other, you will begin to have a likeness, and you will know when these start to feel off. So as some of these features are a little bit more distinctive, and I don't want to muddy the paper too much with too much charcoal, I'm going to use a piece of charcoal that I have filed a little bit more into the shape of a chisel. This will give you a little bit more control, and at the same time, it doesn't mean that you are constantly sharpening to a point. So I'm just working in to the darkest marks of the eyes. Billy has amazing, rather hooded eyes, and I want to make sure I describe this line well. So by putting this first line down, I'm going to really reference back and forth to the picture instead of just throwing it down too quickly. I took this photograph of Billy a couple of weeks ago, and I deliberately set the light up so that I had one light source. It's very easy to have multiple light sources if you're in a room filled with many windows. We're even using flash. But I think for portraiture, it really suits having one light source, particularly from a little bit higher and usually from behind the viewer. In this scenario, it has given us very lovely soft shadows around his cheeks and the shadow under his lip a little by the nose, but his face is very well lit. One thing with a child's portrait, they are attached with these ideas of being sometimes quite spooky, sometimes quite chocolate boxy, and it was one thing that drew my interest into working on children. I felt that they have such interesting, changing faces, and I wanted to find a modern look for a child's portrait. I'm going to include a few more expressive strokes, a few edgier marks, particularly around his collar. And I don't want to fluff out too much or soften too much that isn't, within his cheeks. I want to try and capture some strength because he's my strong little boy. So I'm gonna block in a little bit of the hair at this stage, just so that we have a bit more volume to work with rather than just line. As when you have just the lines to work with, it's much harder to move the structure around. When you have a block mass, you get a better idea and a better sense of the drawing as a whole, and it is easier to reference things to each other when you've got more down. So at this stage, I've started to get a bit more charcoal down, and I'm going to be really thinking about isolating the lightest part of Billy's face. It's between his eyes and his nose and his mouth. That is our focus. But there's also this lovely lighter patch on his forehead, which is really helping define that lovely round structure of his skull. And the contrast of this to his lovely fleshy cheeks is something I'd prefer to focus on. So round his cheeks, he has quite a sharp transition of light. And we know this because this shadow is darker near the edge, and it is quite quickly turning there, which means that that is a fast turning of the shape. But here it's all lovely and soft, so this is a flatter area, but we want to try and create these round, full cheeks without them looking cartoonish, without them looking too full, too flat. It's finding that level of volume that makes Billy Billy. And next, I will take my hog bristle brush and I will begin to work the charcoal into the paper. One thing I found hard with this paper is that no two pieces are the same, no colour is the same. I don't necessarily know how the marks are going to look when they're brushed into the paper. So there have been times where I felt a little bit nervous at how the marks are looking. For instance, this is now looking a cooler tone here on Billy's cheek since I've worked this in, but it is warmer here. It's very, very slight. But if I was now having to paint this, I'd be making this greener and this bluer, and the bluer to me makes it colder. So you've got sort of three tones you're working with. You've got the paper, the charcoal, and then eventually the chalk. But you've got to be aware of your hierarchy of your light. The block-in phase is usually quite aggressive, and I do it so that I can get enough charcoal on the paper to then brush in. I'm pressing pretty firmly with my paintbrush so that the charcoal is either removed or forced into the paper. You can see it begins to create a sense of volume, although none of it is very defined at this stage. So I would then take my rubber and I'd start to remove it in a few areas that I don't think charcoal will stay forever. This phase is quite a long one. There's a lot of pushing and pulling. My main focus will be at Billy's eyes, and I will go back again and again and again, rechecking the whole time about their shape and their proportion. I never settle and accept that everything is in the right place until I've finished. I'm going to put a little bit of charcoal on the bridge of his nose, which I won't necessarily leave there, but it helps me isolate and define his little nose. I've used harder charcoal much earlier in this portrait than I might in others because there is so much subtle light space to work with. And in this space, I'm going to be gently defining that shadow shape. So we've got a lovely dark shadow shape on Billy's cheek here, but this is transitioning bit by bit. And again, it's very useful to think of your head as a piece of marble that you are chipping away at. You want to think of each plane and line almost as straight or flat, and you are chipping away at it so that it turns more and more. I do find with children's portraiture that I'm particularly tough on myself. I think knowing the importance and the significance of the portrait, I have to try and be kinder to myself during the process and not rush making it perfect or making one area perfect. I have to force myself out of this need for satisfaction in the picture, and I have to accept it can be muddy and uncomfortable, and you have to sit with that and learn that is what sits beneath, and those are the important layers that you then ice and make look hopefully beautiful. Before I get too focused on the features, I'm going to add a little bit more detail to the hair at this stage, including this huge curl that sits on top like Mr. Whippy. I'm going to pull out some of these lighter marks with the rubber, and I'll just pull the charcoal off to roughly the colour of the paper, or at least enough to give it definition. As I'm making a mark with any of my tools, I'm really conscious of the movement of the line. For instance, as I'm taking charcoal off Billy's hair, I'm moving with the movement of it, the movement of the curl, thinking about which direction the light is travelling down, and all of these things are helping you create that movement of the right direction. So again, on the cheeks, almost like I'm applying a bit of blusher, I'm going to be sweeping round his cheek, not just across it, because his cheek isn't totally flat. It is luscious and round, very squeezable. I feel like I've got a good amount established that I might now consider the highlights as well as some darker accents. For the more subtle highlights and definition, I'm going to use my rubber for the chin. And this is to describe a little better the underside of his jawline. I don't need to be too precious about this because I'll go over it again. But for now, I can bounce around the rest of the picture, picking out a few accents of light. So when it comes to commissions, I've found I'm not very particular necessarily about lighting and pose, but one thing I always ask is, does that photograph look like them? Sometimes we might want a photograph of the children when they are looking their absolute best, but sometimes that's not them. If they usually have a grumpy face and they have a huge bottom lip because they're pouting, I think that's how you want to remember them, rather than this slightly sweetened version that is on the wall that, yeah, people, they're not getting a character. The character is what we want. So those things that we might think we want to avoid in a portrait are the things that I think make it the greatest. At this stage, I think it's going to be best to get the highlights in on the nose and in the eyes, and it's going to give a little bit of extra lift to the picture. So I'll start by putting my rubber into a point, and I'll dab off exact spot I hope to put the chalk. I think I'm happy with the placement, so I'm now going to follow up with my chalk. I'm going to want to make sure it has a little bit of a point, and then I'm just going to place it in the centre and just twist it. And again, the other eye, and just twist it. I need to now start to work into his hair, because if I don't, this is going to start to get too defined and this will sort of run away. I'm going to brush this out now. This area, I mean, it feels like a mess, which wonderfully it is. It's how his hair is. I'm not going to cut it until he's 18. And I think I will just take my time. I will decide which shapes I like the most. And then I will describe a few little areas of highlight. When it comes to different hair types, I did do a portrait of Billy when he was only, I think he was about 6 months, and he was bald as a coot. So that was very much learning about how to draw the structure of a skull. And it was a really good test. But it can be easier to be drawing hair that is darker, of one block shape, because all you have to focus in on is that little highlight. And the rest of it is going to be deliciously matte and undistracting. But curls is a really good thing to play with. And it's a really good way to practice your different strokes. I'm getting to the later stages of the drawing, and I'm starting to think about things like the ears, the neck, again, going back to the hair, areas that are looking a little bit looser. I don't want to give them lots of focus and lots of detail, so I might just pull out a few things, little highlights that I think describe just enough. One thing I think could be rather lovely is that Billy has got a few extra highlights within his eyes. I'm often cautious, again, about including these sorts of things, but I think there's something rather lovely, and it could create a little bit more life. Again, that's just using a little chalk. And whilst I'm still here at the eyes, I want to really make sure I've thought about all of the slow transitions, particularly the rather wonderful hooded line. When I talk about transitioning, the transitions are the slow movement of the planes, or potentially the fast movement of the planes. So, for instance, on the bottom of Billy's lip, there is a sharp turn here. It is sharply turning away from the light. That is why we have this harsh line. In the mouth, it's a little bit different because the mouth is open, so we're seeing into the mouth. So that's not necessarily about a change of the plane. But it is happening here with his eyelid, and it's happening here with his ears. These are the sharp points. But the rest of it is pretty soft on his face. I think I might go ahead and put a little bit of chalk in his ear to describe that little bit of movement. But again, never putting too much on there. I've left the collar till quite late. It doesn't take me too long. I tried to do this once my hand is a little bit warmer, and because I want to make this decision once. So I will just describe his collar in one go. I never mind about it being perfect. Now that I've established a bit of movement in the hair, I would definitely want to be working further here. But I might start thinking in the same way that I've worked with the collar, and I'm doing this with a piece of charcoal that has a finer point. I mean, this is a chisel, but the edge is sharper. And I'm gonna just describe a bit more movement. By this point, I could spend many, many hours focusing on all these soft areas. I would revisit the hair, I'd maybe have another look at this ear, but I feel like this is a really good place for my eyes to have a break, because I may come back to it and realise that this is how it's meant to be. I hope there are some tips here that you can take home and will be useful and give you that confidence to realise that a portrait of a child is easy to approach and deconstruct, and that it's not that scary once you just get going.
If you'd like to find out more about these masterclasses, go onto our website, skyartsartistoftheyear.tv. Today's tutor is Christian Hook, whose work for Portrait Artist of the Year included a painting of actress Daniela Nardini and a semi-final double portrait of evolutionary biologist Richard Dawkins and the Reverend Sally Hitchner. In a tense final, he dazzled us with portraits of boxer Amir Khan and actor Sir Ian McKellen.
Blimey.
This is pretty impressive, isn't it?
It's outstanding. It's unbelievable.
His daringly innovative prize commission of actor Alan Cumming hangs in the Scottish National Portrait Gallery. And his Portrait Artist of the Decade painting was chosen by his sitter, actor Dame Judi Dench.
I'm going to choose this one.
Christian.
He's the master of creating jewel-like tones, making him the perfect teacher for today's masterclass, playing with colour.
Today I'm going to teach you about color, about how to mix colors, how to lay out a palette, and how to use color expressively. You can mix any color in the world with these 6 colors. So you're going to need a blue, a warm blue, and a cold blue. a warm red and a cold red, so an orangey red and a pinky red, a warm yellow and a cold yellow. With these 6 colors, you can mix any color that there is on the planet. Now I'm going to lay down the palettes and with acrylics first, in my first layer. Because I'm rather lazy sometimes, I'm gonna add a brown. You can mix the brown from these colors, but you know, to make things a bit quicker, I'm gonna add burnt umber. You can use any brown, it doesn't really matter which one it is. So I'm gonna put this at the top of the palette here. I'm gonna use a palette knife, and I change surfaces all the time, and I advise everybody to have fun whilst you're painting, to try out as many things as you can. You know, like don't stick to art materials that are sold in art shops. You know, like I try lots of different surfaces to paint on, and you can make any tool, you know, to move paint around with anything. I'm gonna show you what happens when you mix the colds and the warm colors together, so you have an idea of why I have the palette set as it is. So basically, if I take some cold yellow and mix it with a cold blue, you'll see that I get a really clean, beautiful, bright green. So if I use, for example, the warm blue and the warm yellow, I get a much more muted green. So by mixing both together, you know, you have the whole range from a dull green to a really bright green. And this is how I start off looking at something and deciding what color I'm gonna use. So I've got my bust, I've got my canvas, and I'm just gonna first put a wash down. My first layer is always in acrylic, so I always have an acrylic base, just because I'm really impatient. So I think that every artist should find a way of working that suits their character. So I am really impatient and I want everything immediately. So I try and do everything really quickly first, and then from there, I'll change to oils, and with the oils, I'll be a bit more refined. I still don't like it because it's not as fast as I'd like, but you know, what can I do? And then in the end, I'll refine it and show you the subtleties between cold and warm colors and opposite colors, and how that can work on an expressive painting. I could mix a lot of green in the palette with the colors that I've got here, but as I said, I'm a bit lazy, so I'm gonna just get green from the tube and plonk it on here. Any color that you wanna start with, you don't have to start with the base colors don't have to be brown or any boring color like that. You can experiment before you start any expressive painting with any color that you want, and just fill the whole canvas with one color. Usually, like, you know, you can use water if you want with this, but again, you know, I take the shortcuts. I've chosen a bright green, but I could have chosen a bright yellow or bright red or bright anything. I just like starting with a different, like, exciting, strong undercolor painting. So this basically, really at the end of the painting, you see only some bits of this. It won't be like, you know, something you can see the whole green. So usually, my first layer, I work in layers. So as you'll see, I build upon something. So just like a lasagna or a piece of cheese, when you cut, you'll see down some holes all the way down to the first layer. And sometimes you'll just see, like, you know, 2 layers or something, or sometimes 3. And that's how I play with the painting. So that's the underpainting done. So I'm gonna dry this first with a hairdryer, because I'm really impatient. And then I'll start drawing. When you're using a canvas, or when you're using a board, I'm using a board in this case, it's a wooden board. I personally like to paint the sides, right, the sideburns, in the same color. So just in case you don't want to frame the painting and you want to leave it like this, which is sometimes cool to do. Not all paintings look better when they're framed. So I like to paint the sides first, all sides obviously in the base color. And then as you're painting as well, you know, simplify the sides a bit with whatever you're doing on the front of the painting, and it just really sometimes looks amazing like that. So the next stage is to add some light and dark areas. And another trick that I have anyway, that I found really remarkably helpful since I started in my whole career in painting, was to draw afterwards. I don't draw until later on. Like most people do the drawing at the beginning, and then you lose the drawing, and then you don't know where things are, and then you go back to drawing again, and you don't know where the eye was, and the oil paint goes over it, and it's all a mess. It's much better just make a mess and then draw. So I'm gonna do that with acrylics, because acrylics dry really fast, and as I said, this is my way of doing it. I am an impatient person, and I have no time for anything. So that's the best way to do it if you're like me. So now I'm going to just mix any colors just to get some tones in, and before I start drawing. So I have, like, you know, a bit of a mess on the canvas. It's fun this way because you can make as many mistakes as you want. Nothing has to be right, and you can just, you know, play with color however you want, and play with tones as well. Accuracy is completely unimportant at this stage. Never use thin brushes or anything like that at the beginning. You just want to like block colors in. So I'm just gonna play with light and dark by looking at this head bust. And what colors I use, I can just, you know, play with without having to be, you know, I can surprise myself. So I don't have to think, actually. I am using different patches of flat color without losing the green in the background at the moment. I don't want to lose it all because that's going to be part of the painting. But at the moment, as I said, I'm just working on the lights and the darks very roughly, where they go more or less, and then just using colors as I want to. It doesn't matter at this point, at this stage, I can do whatever I want. It doesn't matter what the color is, as long as it's light in the light areas, it's fine. And as long as the color is darker in the darker areas, it doesn't matter what color you use. So the reason why I'm painting a bust is because, first of all, like most artists like to start off when they start painting, love to paint faces. Something that we're used to, and you know, it feels good to be able to get something similar to what we know. I've chosen a bust with no color, is so I can play with color freely. I'm going to continue for a bit longer with acrylics, try and get some more colors in, more tones in, and then I'll start painting with oils. One of the most important things that I find is to abandon the idea of right and wrong, of trying to get the painting to work or to be nice or beautiful or anything. Just have fun. Like, just get some colors, whichever ones you prefer. You're the artist, and no one can tell you what to do. It's up to you. You must have your favorites, like, you know, so just get some colors and just very, very carelessly, actually. The more careless, the better, because it'll give you, at this stage, the drawing is completely irrelevant. What you want is to fill the canvas with tones of light and dark, more or less in the right places, hopefully in the wrong ones, and have fun with it, you know? You can use whatever colors you want. What you don't want to do, which is a big mistake that I used to make, and I think that every artist makes, is that you get a really small palette and you mix your colors in a small area. And what happens with your brushes, you get one color on one side and another color on the other, and bits of colors that were there already. And when you paint, You get lots of colors there in your brush. Error. That's the only thing that I would suggest, that you clean your palette and have clean color. So your brush only has one color. It doesn't matter what color it is, but you've decided something and you've gone for it. At the moment, right, I am chiseling, basically. So I'm using the background, right, to kind of find out where the bust is. I'm not gonna concentrate very much on getting the drawing right still, because I'm still playing around with it. I have a green base, so I've used a purpley blue on the background. And the little bit of red that it has, you know, resonates with the green, and it starts to create some harmony already in the first layer. Now I'm going to draw the face. So I'm going to draw the actual bust and, you know, just try and get the drawing a bit nearer what I see here. So even if it was completely wrong, it wouldn't matter, because you're going to paint on top, and all the mistakes you can use. So if, for example, the eye is a bit wrong or the nose is a bit longer or whatever, the colors that you had there, right, could actually be like surprising afterwards. So the more mistakes you make in the second layer, the better. So I'm going to get the charcoal. I'm just using thin, you know, stick charcoal. And with this, I'm going to draw on top of the dried acrylic paint and try and get the drawing a bit more accurate. And then I'm going to paint with oils. I myself have no idea what the result is going to be. I never do in any of my paintings. And that's the actual fun part of it. Like, it's a really a discovery every time you paint, if you paint this way. And because I find it so fun, I think that, you know, I'd like to share this because it'll free artists from their reference material. And that is, I think, a really interesting thing to do. So in this next layer, I'm going to use oils. The whole point of this exercise is actually to use color in the dark tones. So I'm gonna mix some dark colors for the dark tones and any bright colors that I want for the light tones. And then once that's done, I'm going to start playing with opposite colors, always leaving some parts that are translucent from the background layer, so they're not opaque, thick mixes. So that in the end you have like a layered lasagna of different stages in your painting, and that makes the painting a lot more exciting. I'm actually playing with my base color, which was green. So I want to create something that has the opposite color, which is red. Red and green are opposite colors. Blue and orange are opposite colors, and yellow and purple are opposite colors. So they're called complementary colors, and that's how I play with color. So I always try and find one and then play with the opposite color beside it. So in this case, you can see there's very warm greens, and beside it, I'm adding cold blues and cold greens. And also the opposite color of green is red, so there'll be pinks all over. And that's how I'm building it up. Also, the dripping, the different strokes, the playing around with different ways of painting. I mean, I can use the back of the brush as well to take paint off and to create thinner marks. So anything you find, making patterns with anything you find, Scott pattern, on your painting, will all create different textures. And if you layer them, at the end, you can choose what you like and what you don't like and just take parts off So you're kind of sculpting instead of painting. It's an interesting process, this one. But the results are much more exciting for you. And anyway, at the end of the day, what you want to do is express yourself. Do what you paint how you are and paint in the way that you want to. So I'm basically, you know, playing with the shadows a little bit at the moment and just making sure that I get some of the darker areas to bring the foam and using different marks as well in my brush so it's not all smooth painting, you know? Some of it will be rough, some of it will be smooth, and have a mix of all of it. And don't be scared to, you know, to use the brush in different ways. It's no such thing as a mistake. You can just always put something beside what you've done that's the opposite. So, for example, I can have a rough mark and then a smooth mark, and you go playing with the different contrasts of things. Sometimes being a bit careless at the beginning is a great thing. And even now, at this stage of the painting, if you look at the dry brush, it gives a different texture to something that maybe, you know, I could do something a lot more blurry with this brush, and the head can maybe disappear at the top a little bit, and it doesn't matter. It's still like, it will still look, you know, you can use your finger to bring things out. When you lose a bit of the painting, like I've done now, for example, like, then you can redraw. You can get the charcoal stick and draw a little bit again. I'm just gonna actually do the same around here a little bit with a softer brush. And then I can get a charcoal stick and just look at the figure again and just mark a little bit. I'm just adding a little bit of the background color in here in the cheeks. So in the shadow areas, I have a little bit of the same color just to balance it out, you know, without actually covering the whole thing. And I'm using a drier stroke with it. You know, strokes are interesting. Look, if I actually go this way, I can actually paint on top of everything and you can still see underneath. So you can create like you don't have to be careful in every single thing, and you can create different textures by using the brush in different ways. So I'm gonna carry on this. I actually liked it. I'm using water with the water-based oils to create like a dripping effect, you know? And working with warms and colds. So you'll see some warm greens, some cold greens, and that's to finish off the painting with the time that I have. Okay, I finished for today's session, which was fun. I hope that this whole session has given you an insight into how to use paints, how to choose colors. You've got those 6 colors that you can mix any color from, and also how to just, you know, play with color. Just go and do what you like. Start with one color and not worry about the result, and really enjoy the process.
If you'd like to find out more about these masterclasses, go onto our website, skyartsartistoftheyear.tv. Our tutor today is Finn Campbell-Notman, who entered Landscape Artist of the Year in 2022. He won his heat with his depiction of Blackpool Beach.
He made very good decisions early on and then really made us think. That's an artist who wants to tell stories, and it's an artist we're really interested in.
At the Thames Barrier for the semi-final, Finn once again produced a painting rich with narrative.
My goodness, I'm way off on my journey down the estuary on that wonderful boat. It's beautifully put together, so that just takes me off away to another land.
In the Welsh village of Portmeirion, he was declared Landscape Artist of the Year.
Finn Campbell-Notman.
His £10,000 prize commission for Royal Museums Greenwich was a seascape inspired by 17th century Dutch maritime artists, the Van de Velders.
That's good. Well done. Thank you very much.
The starting point for Finn's atmospheric landscapes is usually the sky.
I'm hoping to get some really dramatic clouds with some sun rays coming through.
So he'll be taking us through today's masterclass, painting skies and clouds.
Today I'm going to be painting clouds, which for me are integral to how I convey emotion in my landscapes, which some people call slightly moody, but I kind of like that. So today I'm going to show you how I approach clouds in painting. Today's composition is a place where I've been to a few times, which is a very distinctive sort of conical hill near Simonsbury in Dorset. And it has a stand of trees atop it, which were planted in commemoration, I think, of the First World War. And we have storm clouds with a big parting in the middle and a hint of a blue sky. For this particular painting, I haven't gridded up and drawn in such detail as I always might, because clouds by their very nature are amorphous and we don't want any hard edges. So I've just indicated where the sliver of blue sky is. I've just indicated where the hill rise is, and there's a little track that kind of leads our eye into the composition. Clouds are always much more closely in tone than in comparison with the sky. The big mistake most people make is to make it much too contrasty. So I always have a palette of dark to light, and it's usually a mixture of a bit of raw umber, gold ochre, Payne's grey, sky blue, and titanium white. Because I've got this medium warm tone already on the canvas, I can work forwards in colour and tone from that and backwards in colour and tone from that. The beauty of clouds is that they don't make mistakes, only we do. So we can put paint on canvas, we can wipe it off, we can play around with it on the canvas, and eventually we'll get some very diffuse effects because they don't have hard lines. We can move the paint around on the canvas. So it's a very enjoyable subject to paint for that reason. I always use a big brush to begin with. At this stage, we're just, as always, getting some paint on the canvas. I use very, thin but fairly liquid paint, but not thick paint, because what we don't want is streaks. I really don't like streaks in general in painting, but particularly not with clouds because they are diffuse. We can use thicker paint when we get to the highlights, particularly on the whites, because how the light in the room hits the paint on the canvas is a very different thing in those areas. So, continuing to put in the darks, checking our reference. And I'm varying what I'm picking up from the palette a little bit each time, not always using the same colour, because with clouds they are just microtonally different in every part of them. So it's worth just moving around the palette and taking little bits of different tones. Someone once said about writing that it's not writing, it's typing. And so this is not, it's not scrubbing, it's painting. I do this technique, which is sort of swirling and scumbling. It's to mimic how the cloud looks to my eye. It's not particularly soft brush, it's not particularly hard, not a lot of paint on it. And just moving the paint around, mixing it on the canvas really helps to get the character of clouds. Where darker and lighter areas meet, you do want to mix them together a little bit. So don't be afraid at this point if it all looks a bit samey in terms of tonality, because the key to this particular painting and this particular composition is this area between the clouds and where the sun's hitting the clouds on the right. So what I'm doing at the moment is just building up a general tonality to all of this before I move to the lights and the less smoky colours. Having already done sort of darker and medium tones, I'm now mixing a lighter tone, which is probably going to be, well, it's pretty close to the colour of the ground on the canvas. So I'm going to mix that, and that's just adding a bit of gold ochre to the warm grey that I just had. And to move the mixture, so there are some lighter patches than the ground, I'm going to put a little bit of white and ochre to indicate those. So checking the canvas, checking the reference. Yes, look, that's lighter in tone. Particularly this little cloud here and some of these areas here, they're pretty close. Smaller brush. Let's see how it looks. Well, it still looks a little dark, but because it's slightly different tone, we're going to get some visual interest. So this cooler and lighter thing, moving from dark to light, from warm to cool, or vice versa. And that's part of sort of key to painting clouds, is because they are basically vapor in the sky, how the atmosphere affects them on the edges means that they tend to get cooler and lighter the further their sort of edge, if you like, is from our eye. At this stage, I want to put in this blue area of sky. Because that's a cold colour, it'll give me a reference on the canvas, because I'm working at the moment to a very neutral, medium warm tone. I don't have an opposite to compare it to, so putting in this blue will help. A little bit of ultramarine. Now, skies, just as with clouds, the blue of a sky will always be paler at the bottom. So just having a test there. This is closer to the mix I've got to the top. And you can see, even though it looks a little bit of a grey blue, we don't want to go too intense with the blue at this point. Why do we paint clouds? Well, we paint clouds because wherever we are in the world, they are there. They're kind of omnipresent. And they don't really tell us anything. They're always in reference to our emotions. And they're very useful as a motif in painting to convey a sense of hope. And this particular painting, I think, is, if it has a subject or a theme, is about hope, because here are these storm clouds, but here is this sliver of blue sky. And here is this sunlight hitting the cloud. So I've chosen to make the sky in this particular picture sort of 9/10 of the picture, because the subject truly is the clouds and the emotion that I'm trying to convey. Now that I've put in an indication of the blue, if I squint my eyes, ooh, I can see that it's beginning to look you know, by putting the cooler tones in this area, I realised that I don't actually have to do too much in terms of alteration of colours and tones in this particular area. The darkest part of a cloud is always lighter than the dark parts in the shadows on the ground. So I'm going to put in this foreground here. And again, that will tell me whether my sort of close tones in this area are feeling about right. So for the ground and the foreground, I still want to keep it subtle. I don't want it to be, as I say, the subject of the painting. I want this area here where the clouds and the highlights on the clouds lead the eye through down to the trees. I just want this area to support that. So, raw umber. Tiny bit of sepia green. And for the area on the hill, I guess it's, as a colour, it's sort of a warm russet because it's heather. So I'm just roughing in some of the elements of the trees on the hill and some of the inherent sort of curves of where the trees are, all to help the sense of where we are in the composition within the process of painting. Just to give us a clearer idea of whether the tones here are of the right sort. I'm not really worried about making elegant brush strokes. I'm just sort of roughing in, using a similar technique with the clouds. I want to keep overall the brushwork sort of almost, we're not really seeing brush strokes. What we're seeing is a kind of Leonardo da Vinci kind of sfumato, just a smokiness, an overall kind of nice atmosphere. Now, you can see, just by leaving the path for the moment, getting the ground in, this feels a little light, but we have a sense of weight to the bottom of the picture. And that's going to help contrast with this very airy sense. The other thing to say about painting clouds is they do sort of give a particular elevation to the mood. They are a kind of indicative of a sense of freedom and liberty. So having sort of well-formed, well-painted, well-thought-through clouds in your composition can elevate what is what could be a fairly mundane landscape. I'm putting in a very light, warm, sort of greeny yellow mixture in the center of this form here, just to get a sense, again, of the tonal quality. And the reason I'm doing that is because clouds being 3D, we want to give a sense of them being 3D rather than the symbols on a weather report. So I'm putting in these areas of light where approximately they're going to be. One of the first lessons we have as artists is a drawing exercise where we draw a sphere. And we do that so that we understand how a 3D object is translated into a 2D picture or painting. Same applies with clouds. They are 3D objects, and sometimes it's a temptation to simplify them too much. I mean, as I say, as it stands with this painting, it's really simplified, and yet we're still getting a sense of 3D, and that's because always the edges are the thing with clouds and the blending. Now, some masters can make clouds appear as if from nothing with very few strokes. With this, I would continue a little bit, but I don't want to get it too finished, because during the painting of clouds, you want to remain loose, you want to remain conversely fluid, you want it to be unforced. As you can see, I'm painting basically cumulonimbus, big, puffy, fluffy clouds, of which we have more than enough in this country. But it's worth remembering and knowing the different types of clouds and when and how they occur, particularly when we're thinking about how to impart emotion and the sense of movement into a canvas. Generally, these are the clouds we see the most, and they're kind of not necessarily the simplest to paint, but they're what we see most frequently, and they're usually in unsettled weather or low pressure. So it's worth knowing what the differences are and when they occur, and how they might affect the emotion and the feeling that you want to impart in a painting. It's always worth standing back from your painting to see where you're at with it, and I do that a lot. I shuffle backwards and forwards, putting in more than my 10,000 steps a day. I've now done that, and I've seen that, contrary to what I said earlier, I've noticed that this painting requires a lot more contrast, so I'm going to go ahead and put in some more darks, particularly this area and over here. Now, after having put in a lot of loose and scumbled and rough brushwork in, I'm now going towards this key area here and working on the edges. I've got my lightest light, or what I thought was my lightest light, and so I know where that is, and so I know that it's slightly warmer and darker towards the edges, so I've got a mixture of this beautiful colour, and I'm just bringing that up to the edge of the sky. Now you can see how close in tonal values those are. If this was a black and white photograph of this particular area, you'd see that they would hopefully almost be indistinguishable in tonal values, but the colours are really close as well. But one's hot, one's cool. So I'm just working the edges and making sure that they're not too sharp, but they're sharp enough. We're getting close to a much more natural feel to how the cloud shape is and how the light is diffusing within it. And we can work forwards and backwards to give a sense of the sort of myriad different forms, points of light where the light's coming through in different areas. I've focused almost exclusively on the clouds today. Don't forget the foreground. I think it's time for me to put in the indication of these trees here. Again, they are the darkest part of this painting. They're going to be darker than this, so they're almost black. And once I've got those in, again, I'll have a key to know whether overall the tonality is feeling about right. A little tip which sort of goes against the norms of oil painting is, instead of a maul stick, I have the brush that I've just been using for the diffusion here, and I'll use that for if I'm painting a detail like these trees, just to use it as a rest there. again, after checking and walking back and having a look and assessing everything, squinting, the foreground, all of this foreground is way too light. So I'm going to go in and darken the whole area and tighten it up a little bit. For today, I'm going to stop here after putting in these little highlights. My eyes are a little tired. It's always worthwhile letting a painting rest. Clouds are wonderful. I encourage you to go out, look up, stand and stare for a little while, and then come back and paint some clouds. And I hope this has been helpful. I absolutely love painting clouds, and I hope you do too.
If you'd like to find out more about these masterclasses, go onto our website, skyartsartistoftheyear.tv. Today's tutor, Wendy Barrett, won her heat on Portrait Artist of the Year painting opera singer Nikki Spence.
She's given us a real Scot here.
And you do understand that he's a mountain of a man, even though we're only getting head and shoulders.
In the semi-final, her arresting portrait of former Spice Girl Emma Bunton earned her a place in the final.
Everything is very well balanced. There's not much there, and yet every element sings.
And it was her commissioned portrait of her husband Fred, followed by her portrait of our very own Joan Bakewell.
I love your palette.
You got a little table and put your gin tonic on it.
Wonderful.
That saw her crowned Portrait Artist of the Year 2023.
Wendy Barrett. Wendy, great painter with a sensitivity for the human condition, and that combination is just magical.
For her winning commission, Wendy produced an ethereal portrait of international conservationist Dr. Jane Goodall
Will you help me unveil it?
for the National Portrait Gallery.
Oh, wow.
Well done.
Thank you.
Wendy makes features of lines and shapes in her expressionistic paintings, which she achieves by sketching her underdrawings in oils.
I'd probably do more drawing than I do painting. I'm a lover of lines.
This makes her the ideal person to lead today's masterclass, drawing with paint.
Today I'm going to be showing you my favourite part of the painting process, which is drawing with paint. I've got Fred my sitter and I've got all my paint squeezed out, so let's get going. For the first drawing, I love using, this is my favourite brush, which is a small hog's hair brush. And I'm just going to use one colour, and I'm going to have a play around with different brushes as the drawing progresses. So just to start with, I'm just gonna start mapping out where I'm gonna put him on the page. So I'm holding my brush at the far end, and I'm being quite playful and expressive with my marks at this stage as I'm trying to work out where everything is. And it also adds a lot of dynamism to the painting as well. I'm working on a cotton canvas surface, which has got quite a rough surface to it. So you get, well, I get that lovely sense that I'm perhaps drawing with charcoal on paper, which is what I love to do. I'm looking for all the edges, the main landmarks of the face. So I'm starting to put in the features, just playing around with marks, working out. So this is a big part of the drawing, is you're trying to work something out. And I like the way that you can see a drawing develop with lines left in there. And this goes all the way through my painting process. So you'll often see some of these lines that I'm putting in the first layer still showing through after the final layer. So I'm working across the face rather than doing a silhouette all the way, or a profile going all the way around and then filling it in. I'm going to do a quick bit of measuring so I can check that things are falling in the right place. I've got the eye level and the bottom of the nose, but I'm just going to check that they fit with the size of the forehead. Top of forehead to brow, and then I'm going brow to bottom of nose, and I can see they're the same. And brow, brow to bottom of nose. Okay, we're all right. We can carry on. So I'm always referring back to what I've put down, judging everything from that. Put in any lines you see. So it may be lines across the face, it may be lines that are marking where the light falls, where the shadow shapes are. You can see in some places my brush mark is a lot fainter than at other times. And I like to work like this when I'm using charcoal. So what excites me about drawing is finding all those shapes, but also the drag of the paintbrush on the surface, how you can use very light lines and very dark lines, and you can mix them up and it adds excitement to the drawing. Put as many marks as you like onto the canvas, because they're going to help you as long as you understand the marks you're putting down and what they represent. It could be in a different colour, it could be with a different brush, but use marks that are exciting to you and are understood by you. So I'm now looking at structures in the face as well. So it's not just contours around, I'm seeing a lovely line which goes down perhaps from the ear across the face. So I'm now going to start to have a bit more fun with this. I'm just going to put the ear in place, and I think I'm going to change brush and see what happens with a change of texture and brush. So I'm just going to mark where this ear is, because you know, I've got to use the references that I've already got. Usually, the distance between eye to bottom of chin is the same as from front of the eye to back of the ear. And Fred's ear is slightly further back, which actually does happen more so in the male anatomy rather than the female anatomy.
Are there any other differences that you can think of between men and women's skulls?
So there's tendencies. So men's ears tend to be further back. Mm-hmm. The brow tends to be lower. So your eyebrows tend to be lower. Mm. But really, when you're drawing, you're looking at what's there, not what you're told is there, which is the important thing. go for a profile today. For one thing, I really love profiles. Also, for me, it's a quicker way of making a portrait. I'm only having to deal with one eye. I'm not having to get it in line with the famous second eye. I'm only drawing one nostril and half a mouth, so and one ear, which when you're rushed, that's quite nice. But also, I love the abstraction of it. So you can see that by working across the face rather than all the way around and filling it in, I'm actually being able to refer to things that I've already drawn in quite an effective way. And look for things like hairlines as well. You can have a real nice play with the hair because it's a fabric over the top of the skull. But it has direction, so put in those main directions that you're seeing within the hair. It will just give it structure. Okay, so we've now, I'm just having a look, I think his chin is coming out too far, so I'm just gonna alter it. Keep looking all the way around the head as you're drawing and keep correcting. To do a good drawing, you need to look again. Don't think that you've got it right first time, or even second time or third time. You need to keep looking all the way through your drawing. So we're now, we can, just going to put in that lovely scoop of the neck of his shirt. Let's have a look. If I add a bit more thinner to my paint, you get a slightly bolder mark. So play around with thinners and mediums, and that will give you a different mark on your canvas. You can also play around with different canvases, so it may be a smooth board where the surface is very, what they call fast, because your brush will slip across it. So think of it in terms of an ice rink. But this is a more of a stony path route. So for the first 20 years of my drawing, I just drew on paper with dry materials, really. And when I didn't come to painting till much later on. And I got really frustrated about not being able to represent as expressively in paint as I could with charcoal. And then I started noticing more artists who I really love who used lines within their painting and kept them in, and you could see evidence of their drawing within their painting, even when it was finished. And I just loved that, and that inspired me to start thinking about leaving those marks in and thinking about painting as actually drawing with paint. I'm going to put a bit more expression into some of the marks. And I'm going to use a thinned down paint and just play around with drawing marks to create interest and to push the paint around on the surface. They may extend beyond the drawing already done. I may wipe out some of the drawing already done. I don't mind. It starts to add interest, and that's what we want. We want the eye to be taken across the painting and the drawing to feel like it's alive. At the end of the day, I've got a live sitter. I've got somebody living and breathing in front of me, and I want the painting to look alive. So I'm not necessarily following tonal areas. I'm following direction and just feeling the form of the head rather than worrying too much about the tone. Just going to put in a bit down there. I'm now going to pick up a different brush to have a play. So this is a time in your painting when you can afford to be really, really experimental. So I think I'm now nearly at the end of the drawing stage. It's got enough marks to excite me to take me into the next stage of the painting, which is where I start to mix colours from a full palette and start to work with tone and colour. So once I've put in all my colour and I've actually put in patches of paint, once I've got to the end of that stage, I'm then going to show you how I bring back the drawing into the painting when I'm starting to correct things that have slipped, which they tend to do. So what I'm doing now, I'm just rendering it quite fluidly. I'm leaving some of my drawing lines showing through because that's what I like to show the progress of. So some of these lines are going to stay here. I'm just keeping it very loose, but with things in the right place. As you're painting in your colours, be aware that you're actually drawing form with your brush. So you've got brush marks working across the face and around the form, so you're getting that sense of your model, your sitter, being a three-dimensional person. And don't be afraid at all about leaving some of your underdrawing showing through. This can add to your painting. Okay, so I've got to a stage in my painting where I've put in most of the colour on the face, so I'm now going to put in, get a big brush, make some big mixes, and just put in the shirt, the background, and the hair in quite a loose way, so we get an idea of where they are and how those colours are working with the flesh tones. Okay, so I think now the painting has got to a certain stage where I've put on lots of blocks of paint in the right sort of tones, the right sort of colours, covered all the canvas, but I know in some places I'm starting to lose the drawing. So I've developed a way of re-establishing my drawing, not with big blocks of paint, but with a thinner brush to get those drawing lines back in and re-establish parts of my painting which tend to slip at this point. I like the lines to show through because it shows the working progress of the painting. It shows its history and what went before. And, you know, painting and drawing is a bit of a struggle, so I'm showing you my struggle as well, but it's the story of the painting. So have a go with it and see what happens if you do this too. Don't be afraid to leave some of your previous marks in the paint. It adds interest for the eye, but it also is showing how you worked things out, which is part of this process. So let's get this nostril in. It's parts of the drawing that I probably didn't get right in the first place. I'm also now seeing that the mouth is way out. So the mouth and moustache should be coming right over here. So that's what I mean about when you're putting down big blocks of paint, the actual drawing and where things are placed can slip and you need to re-look. There's a lovely quote, I think by Matisse, who said, the more you look, the more you see. And it's very true. You think you've seen things right, and then you keep looking and it changes and it looks different. So really keep looking. And be prepared to change your painting. If you notice it's wrong, it will, and you don't correct it, it will always be wrong. So don't be afraid of changing things in your painting. So I've got to the end of my second stage of painting and looking at this area at the moment, keeping everything else quite loose. Now I'm going to work with some different colours over the top, and I'm going to get a bit freer and a bit more expressive with lines. So I'm going to look for certain colours that zing, perhaps between a couple of colours, perhaps around the edge of the profile, or perhaps between a shadow and a light. Sometimes you get a real ping of colour. But I'm also going to just play around the whole painting and the form. So I'm going to work with the rigger brush, because this is the part where you stay expressive and spontaneous, keeping your paint moving and just having a look at what colours you can put in. I can see a purple. It's not a very zingy purple, but I'm going to make it quite a zingy purple. I'm just going to play with that, and I'm going to look for other places in the painting that it might work. So just running my eye across what I've done. I can see some nice purples in the shadows here as well. This might be a bit too bright. I'm going to go for it anyway. Oh no, it's all right. And I'm actually following the form and just dragging it across the surface. So holding my brush quite loosely, so the brush is doing quite a lot of the work. I'm seeing lines that come across around Fred's eye, up through here, and then across these lines of how the hair falls. And it's those that interest me. What other colours can I see? I can see some quite greeny blues happening in the beard down here. So I'm going to take my cerulean blue, bit of white. That might be too punchy. Just add a bit of green. I'm seeing greens in that beard. So let's see what happens when I put that in. I think I need to go actually even greener. Once you put a colour on, you'll see how it affects the other colours around it. Looking for the shapes that are being made, twisting and turning. So you can see with a rigger brush how it sort of dances across the surface, which is something I really like. So this last stage of me playing with paint, I'm doing it on top of an established painting that I'm happy with the tone and the light, and it just gives me the freedom to be expressive. And this is the part that makes, for me, the painting worthwhile, because I can then be free again, I can still be drawing, and I can be playing with line and colour. So why don't you have a go? Maybe with a rigger brush, maybe with a different brush, maybe with a palette knife. But have fun with it and don't be afraid of leaving these drawing lines in your painting. It can really add to the sense of your sitter and, you know, give that life to your painting.
If you'd like to find out more about these masterclasses, go onto our website, skyartsartistoftheyear.tv. I've been working as an artist for 30 years, and it's not always been an easy life.
Painting has got the word pain in it.
But during my 11 years as a judge on Artist of the Year, it's been a joy to see other artists at work.
Nice watching you paint.
Thank you.
And breathing down your neck as well.
At times, it's even made me emotional.
What Samira does, she brings magic to the process of painting. So I'm getting emotional.
Oh, hi.
Judging on this program has been an unforgettable artistic adventure.
Paint that. I don't know.
With spectacular landscapes.
I think it's my favorite location ever, ever, ever.
Really?
Yes.
And glittering celebrity sitters.
And begin.
Wow. Oh my gosh.
Very good.
Along the way, I've had the privilege of meeting hundreds of talented artists.
That he can do this is kind of mind-boggling. And the personality is just pow!
21 of whom have taken home the Artist of the Year crown.
Morag Caister, Christian Hook, Wendy Barrett, Finn Campbell-Notman.
With winning commissions hanging on the walls of some of Britain's most prestigious institutions.
Just beautiful. So how much?
And now, in this new chapter, a select few are joining me to share some of their tips, tricks, and hard-earned lessons. In this final masterclass, I'll be consolidating all we've learned so far to help you confront that blank canvas and learn how to approach a portrait. Welcome to our last session together. I hope you've enjoyed all the masterclass we've brought to you over the last few weeks. You've learnt a lot. I think you've learnt how to put together a good composition. You've learnt about tone. You've learnt how to mix colour. You've learnt about how to paint a head a la prima. I mean, you've got the whole, set of skills given to you by some brilliant artists. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope it inspires you to go and do your own work. If you're still a bit anxious, I've got a little exercise here that helps to limber you up, hopefully. It's like a sort of warming up exercise before you go to the gym or go for a run. It takes all those skills that you've been taught over the last few weeks, and it sort of brings together in a very sort of playful, fun way to get us sort of out and actually making painting. So let's start. I'll explain to you how exactly we're going to do this. So as you can see, the canvas I'm working on is very small because it's supposed to be a short, joyful, sort of energetic, fearless exercise, and we want to get that sort of down very quickly. We're going to use a lot of paint, and I've got a very good photograph I'm working from of my friend James. Most importantly, we're going to work with a limited palette. I think you've learnt about that as well in a past masterclass. I've adapted it slightly. I'll tell you about that. So we've got titanium white here, a nice creamy titanium white, some whites are stiffer. I think for this exercise, we need the paint to move quite quickly, so that's that. We've got raw sienna here. We've got a vermilion here, which is a red, which veers more to the orange. Then we've got a cadmium dark red here, which is more purpley, because, yes, so if you mix that with blue, you get a dark purple. Now, because those are my two darkest colours, and it's a bit cool, isn't it? So I've added a burnt sienna, so I can warm the darks up if I need to. But, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it's, 5 colours and white. It's not much. It's hopefully very simple, yes, and easy to mix a lot of interesting colours out of. So, painting heads. There are very many different ways of doing it. There's the sort of old-style atelier way of doing it, where you're using underpainting with tones and drawing, and you slowly build the whole head up. There are people who draw out the head very precisely and fill in the colour afterwards. And then we've got artists like Auerbach and Giacometti who repaint the portrait again and again, hoping that one of the goes they do brings the whole thing together and happens in one session, which is kind of exciting, but very labour-intensive. The way we're going to paint today is we're going to start in one spot and we're going to travel across the painting and finish at the other side. Okay, so we're going to make a spiky, interesting painting that is strong, maybe wrong, rather than weak and right. I once said that I was teaching a session, and a woman said that's how she liked her men. Right, so strong and wrong. Maureen, you know it was you. What are we going to start with? That forehead looks quite formidable. Let's just pop in there we go. Right, so I put the brush mark on. The paint's okay, but I was saying about using lots of paint. Let's use more paint. There, look at that. Isn't that yummy? Right, so we've got this, we've got the forehead here. I'm basically using a lot of pink, as you can see, but there's that highlight there, so let's whack in the highlight. I know people like to save that up till last, but let's make it a pale blue. Let's see if that works. Yeah. The idea is here that we're making a forehead. We're not illustrating a forehead. We're kind of yes. And you'll be quite surprised how very quickly you can, by putting down the right tones in approximately the right place, you can create something that looks realistic. And how fun that is. So lots of paint, again, lots of paint. There we go. So drawing the hairline in here. And let's just, come on, let's be really courageous. So I'm mixing red and blue. I'm going to come down here and I'm just going to paint that whole side of his head coming down and down like that. Yummy. So that side's locked in. Right. So there's a dark coming down. So again, remember tones. There's on the ridge of his head is a dark. Oh, that's way too dark. Crazy, but it looks great. And again, oil paint is fantastic. You put down a too dark piece of paint, you can go over the top and visually mix it. Look, so I'm using the paint from underneath to make the tone I need. So look, we've got a bony forehead, there's a light there. Maybe we need to get that darker bit in the middle here. There, so that's sort of here, isn't it? There we go. Look, can you see already? And we're going to draw in, not in as dark as we can yet. I'm going to draw in this. Now, I picked this photograph because you've got James's face. It's got the light coming from the left. You've got the highlights that we just painted in the forehead. You've got the shadow, strong shadow shapes. So you've got on the edge of his skull here, on that edge there, there's a shadow. You've got the shadow of the eye socket, of course, where no light is getting into. And then his cheekbone, down his cheek, there's a shadow that lightens up. But what is beautiful is the light has come through the window here and bounced off this wall here, and he's got a lovely sort of light coming reflected into the other side of that bone there. So we're going to pop that in as well. You see, I use chopped up, cut up newspaper to clean my brushes. It works very well. How many times have you cleaned your brushes and it's broken through the paper and you're covered in paint? It used to happen to me a lot. And then I used to use pages of the yellow pages. Remember yellow pages? You've got to be certain vintage to remember that. I used to use that. So you paint portraits, and as I painted, the silence would be interrupted by me going. So I thought it better to just cut it down and use this. It's inexpensive. It's recycling. I would almost go as far to say it's green. Do you recall me saying about soft transitions and hard transitions? Now, the transition I put there is very, very strong. I love it, but it might be a bit too much. So I'm going to soften that transition up slightly by putting a tone in that is a bit softer on the old bonds. Here we go. But then, you know, you don't want to soften everything up, otherwise you lose the... Look, that was a really lovely mark, that first one, and we don't want to mess that up too much. So I think I've become too polite. I'm going to put it back in again. There we go. Yeah. So, right. We've got a forehead. All right, let's try the eyes now. Okay, that's going to be a slightly different proposition. So, light, shadow. We've got the shadow side of the nose, and it's pretty straight, but it's the, I mean, apart from the eyes, it's a very dark shadow in there, so we've got to really make that work. That's too much. And we're creating a hollow for the eye. There we go. And then the eye itself, let's just give it an indication of the eye is here. That's not right. There. And then his luxuriant eyelashes are here. Let's just put them there. Right. So now we're working our way slowly down. The top of the eyelids need to put in. They're in half shadow, so we've got to find a colour and a tone that suits that. Let's pop that in here. There we go, lovely. Right, I'm going to work down just to create the under bit of the eye, which has got a bit of pink in it. So we're going to mix that up. Let's see if I can get that in here. There we go. But there's a yummy little bit of highlight just on where the light catches the eyelid at the bottom. So I'm going to do that. And I'm going to, when I go paint my highlights, they're going to be slightly cooler. Now, it's so subtle, and as usual, I'm going to overdo it, but that's the fun of messing around with paint here. Let's see if I can get that in here, there. Lovely. Right, so we've got the underneath of the eye. Let's put in that cheekbone there. That cheekbone there. Let's see if that works. Ooh, that's too dark. So add a bit of white, make it a bit warmer, and maybe do there. That's nice. Now, having done that, we need to move across to the other eye, put in the nose. So the whole thing is starting to grow out of that first couple of marks. So the nose doing that, it's coming down, and I'm just going to put that red here. There, lovely, lovely. So we've got the groove, and then we've got the nose, the bone, and then we need that sort of bit here in between. Let's pop that in. And then at some point, I'm going to have to tackle the other eye, and that's really tricky. But, you know, by the seat of our pants, it's the way we paint. So the smallness works because each brush mark I make has a profound effect on the whole head. So things are moving quite quickly. If it was bigger, things wouldn't be happening so quickly. The paint, I'd have to put on huge amounts of paint to get the same effect. So it's a perfect kind of size for being gestural, painterly. The paint goes on thickly, it sits there, and it gives you, it changes, the head evolves very quickly and in a very loose way. And because it's much smaller, of course, our brain can look at this object and extrapolate what it's supposed to mean much easier. If it's a bigger head, the eye has to move around the head, and it's harder to make it read. Whereas here, it gets the whole thing in one glance, and although it's very abstract, you can fool the brain into thinking it's a three-dimensional head quite quickly. I was hanging out and it was working very well, and now I've hit upon a sort of structural problem, and I'm just having to rein it in slightly just to try to get the drawing and find out where the bridge of the nose is and how it works within this space. And I've just put in one mark. I've been measuring a bit more carefully, and I put in one mark, and now the nose is making sense. So I think we've kind of caught the disaster that was about to unfold. Famous last words. But so yes, it's just a matter of moving stuff around, really. And as I said before, because you can do so much on a small space so quickly, things fall apart, but they resolve quite quickly as well. So I'm hoping that I've now resolved it and I can continue on my merry way. Let's see. Painting is an interesting and complicated undertaking, and as you can see, I'm sort of doing a limbo dance, or working out my legs, having a bit of a leg workout while I'm painting. So yes, make sure you set up your easels in a good way before you start out. Makes things a bit easier. Got the nose where I want it. Now I'm going over it with marks that have got a bit more oomph to them and look a bit more interesting. There's nothing like a weak painting. So I want it to be nice and strong. So yes, the angle of the eye is difficult because James's head is tilting this way and it's also tilting that way, and I am not at the same level as the head. So the drawing has been a bit awry. So that has held me up a bit. But once I've just worked out that I just needed to lower it a bit, and now I'm going to put the eyelid in, it now makes sense. And then we'll have had finished the forehead, the two eyes, the nose, and I'm coming down to the mouth. I've brought in the background to sort of contain the head. When I said we paint, I'm going to paint from the top to the bottom because I left out the hair. Maybe before we go further down, I should just pop in the hair so the whole premise of working from top to bottom actually is true. But let me just fiddle with this eye a little bit longer, and then we will go and do that. So I've put in the background round the cheeks. We're putting in the hair now. I'm going to just build that last side here and block in the ear. And then we've got a nice forehead. We've got a nose that makes sense at last. We've got two eyes that are sitting on the same head. It was getting a bit Picasso before. And then we can get down to the mouth. So I've been struggling with this painting, but it's been fun. I don't know how to explain. It's like a puzzle. It's like a very organic puzzle. At the end of it, you have a brilliant painting. Well, hopefully. And in the process, things don't go right. Sometimes, you know, everything just falls into place, and I don't know how that happens, and it is marvelous. But sometimes just trying to work out, it's like a really complicated game. And when I'm swearing and kicking things, and I'm still enjoying myself. And I think that's what creativity is about. At the end of it, you know, with a game of Sudoku, let's say, you're left with a grid of numerals. I mean, here at the end of it, you're left with a painting that didn't exist before, something really amazing, and with some really beautiful bits of painting. And I mean, that's really exciting, isn't it? So I'm putting in James's mouth, and I've got the anatomy of it, but I haven't got the right expression. He's thoughtful, but he's happy thoughtful, and I've got him thoughtful and a bit miserable. And the subtleties of expression, I mean, it's quite complicated. So not only is there physical anatomy of the head, the sculptural aspect of it, the thing I've been tackling, but there's also the sense of the person. And I said it didn't, you know, what we're not looking at here is a direct likeness. But what we do want is a sense of a living, breathing person and a sense of optimism. So I'm going to try to get that in here, but it is something that can be quite elusive. Well, I think I'm done for today. That was a fun exercise. I hope all the masterclasses you've been privy to will get you out there trying these things yourself. You've been given a lot of information by a lot of great artists. It's been lovely sharing our skill set with you. Go out and make use of it. If you'd like to find out more about these masterclasses, go onto our website, skyartsartistoftheyear.tv.